Chapter 28. After all we had gone through, my spouse and I weren't inclined to go back to the UPCI quite yet. Without hours of weekly preaching telling me what to think, I had time to think for myself. Services took an enormous amount of my time. With all the church problems we saw, I eventually stopped blindly accepting whatever the pastor said, although the early teachings remained embedded in my foundation. I scribbled notes throughout each service, writing down every statement that I didn't immediately know was correct. The next day, I would research, sometimes spending hours on a single sentence the pastor spoke, before I came to a definite conclusion. Then I would go over the findings with each relative that was at the particular service. It was imperative that we didn't believe a single wrong detail. I planned to put my new spare time toward the urban missionary project, where we would win the atheist community to God. The atheists were untouchable. Whenever we tried to convert one, they simply said they didn't believe in the Bible or a God, and we had no leg to stand on. They were reprobate. I was drawn to them, however, because of their appeal to logic. Logic was the understanding of truth, and God was truth, so therefore I should be able to use logic to show them God. This was consistent with my beliefs, because I didn't operate on faith alone. The ongoing miracles I experienced were as close to proof of correctness as one could get. My life was transformed by it, and theirs could be too. I needed to show that many of God's attributes could be derived from pure reason. That would help bridge the gap between logic and faith, so that the leap from not trusting the Bible to trying it out was smaller. Miracles, by definition, were things that could only come from God. I would need to show that miracles were possible, and would confirm their faith. In the middle of the project, a relative had a health crisis. We all prayed to decide what healthcare decision to make, and we all heard matching answers independently. Once the decision was made, we learned we were completely wrong, and the relative's life was turned upside down. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. Hearing from God was a pillar of my faith, but it failed when we needed it most. How could this be, I thought? Through prayer I had predicted the future, declared people's intentions, and located hard-to-find items. I had the spiritual gifts of wisdom, knowledge, prophecy, and discerning of spirits. I had even healed the sick, but now it was all being called into question. My thoughts were very loud, and I intensely studied to understand what happened. Some relatives suggested that we misheard, because the context of our minds was incorrect, meaning we didn't understand what we were asking. If that was true, then the gift was completely dependent on our minds, which I wouldn't accept. Further study showed that we used our gift of hearing from God differently than what was in the Bible. There must be something amiss. Then it hit me. We had been miscounting our success rates. If we heard an incorrect answer, the fault was ours, and we added a new rule for how to ask better questions in the future. It was operator error and didn't count against the gift. We were undercounting failures and overcounting successes. Many questions couldn't be tested. Should I ask for a 3% raise, or a 5% raise? No matter the outcome, it was what God wanted, and we counted it as correct. I went through years of past answers. When I excluded untestable answers and included the operator errors, our accuracy was under 60%. Chance plus our mind. I healed the sick, but I prayed for hundreds of sicknesses, so probability guaranteed I would see healing eventually. The gift of wisdom was my Bible knowledge, finding lost items was luck, and prophecy was luck with knowledge of our narrow church environment. I was shaken to my core. I resolved that I could still reach the atheists. Most church members and ministers couldn't hear from God like I used to, but they still did God's work. My authentic personal miracles were solid. I developed a proof stating that everything had to come from something. The ultimate originator in my proof was responsible for all creation, had no beginning, and had enough power to create everything. Could this ultimate originator be all-powerful? After a while, I became stumped. The argument that everything came from something would also apply to God's own actions, meaning God had a first action, and therefore a beginning, which would contradict the Bible. I was also unable to prove that something infinite could exist. In fact, the arguments against it were mounting against me. There was clearly something that I didn't understand. Meanwhile, I could advertise that my life was transformed, but skeptics would need proof that it was God who transformed me. The conversion experience would change their minds, but I would have to prove the transformation was a miracle before they would try it. I spent months forming proofs and playing devil's advocate. I found that other groups with contradicting teachings claimed to speak in tongues and have miraculously changed lives. If that was true, and they didn't teach what we teach, then our teaching couldn't be proved as the cause for the miracle. Every miracle could be duplicated in appearance, so miracles couldn't be observed, only personally experienced. This meant a bigger leap of faith. Not good for the project. Eventually I realized that an irrefutable miracle could remove the need for faith, which would contradict the Bible. So there was no way to prove anything was miraculous. How could I prove my experience was real then? I couldn't. The bridge I was building from logic to the Bible led to nowhere, and I was falling off it. If I couldn't prove miracles, which are the only guaranteed interactions with God, then I couldn't prove any part of my experience was divine. I had no way to know if I was communicating with God, if I was pleasing to Him, or if there was a heaven waiting for me. My evidence was gone. Now all I had left was the Bible and faith. Next, I spiral into despair.